Fred, thank you very much, and thank you to 40 Plus for having me back here. It's actually the fourth time that I've been at 40 Plus. So I have two books. I have a book that Fred mentioned, Create a Future the Peter Drucker Way, that came out in 2013. And then my first book came out in 2009, called Living in More Than One World, How Peter Drucker's Wisdom Can Inspire and Transform Your Life. At the end of the slides, I'll put up the covers for those books. So I did presentations for each of those two books, and then I came back last year, summer of 2018, and I did kind of more of a workshop format on Create a Future the Peter Drucker Way. Today, though, we're talking about reinventions, and I wanted to make this you'll see there'll be a little bit of Drucker-related content, but we're going to do it kind of based on where I've been since 2011, which is a journal called Leader to Leader. I'm a managing editor. I've written for it a couple times in the past, but I've been managing editor since 2011. And Leader to Leader, I brought a couple of, these are older but certainly very good sample copies. I don't know if any of you have seen this over the years. It's a co-publication of the Francis Hesselbein Leadership Forum in New York and Josie Bass, John Wiley. So I brought a couple, and I'm going to, at the end, for the first two people who ask questions, I'm going to give you a copy of the journal. And it's a great incentive because, as you know, it's very hard. No, this doesn't count.
Well, I do we have to wait to the end? No worries.
I like your initiative, but that part doesn't count. So, and I think I should really say a little bit about, one of the reasons I'm so interested in reinventions, and I wrote about the concept of reinvention in both my books, is that this is something that I've done over the years. I've done it a number of times. So probably most people don't realize that yesterday, September 15th, was the 37th birthday or anniversary of USA Today newspaper. It's not something most people think about, how old a particular newspaper is, but yesterday was the 37th birthday. So I worked at USA Today for 21 years, 21 of those 37 years. Started in '82. I joined 5 years later in '87, and I was there until 2008. And my main work was part of the corporate library staff, which they don't have anymore. And I also, that was all 21 years, and then the last 12 years, I'd had a lot of writing experience before that, so I also wrote for the money section. I wrote about business and management books. And I absolutely loved that job. But two things: I knew that it wasn't going to last forever. And I liked doing other things as well. So I had developed kind of what Drucker had talked about parallel careers. So I'd already been doing my writing. I was teaching as an adjunct at Catholic University, where I still teach. I just finished up a teaching semester last month. And I really wanted to be an author. And so when the inevitable, the bell tolled and the inevitable thing happened, and at the end of 2008, I was told that my job did not exist anymore. At that time, I had a book contract, because I've been working on this for years in the morning on what became Living in More Than One World, the first book. So I was working on it. I had a deadline that I had to beat actually the next month. Not happy about it. Not happy about not having that job anymore. But I did. So I did the book. So my reinvention from just the library world with some writing to more writing. I should also say that an earlier reinvention into the library world I used to work around music. I used to work around rock music. I had a small record label. I had a mail order company. I did a lot of rock music writing. And I still love rock music, but it's really, if any of you have ever done anything around that, it's really difficult to make money in that. And the way things things have changed about that field, but it's just changed in different ways, and it's still difficult because I still kind of follow it. So I changed librarianship into that, and then I, through a variety of reasons, I was able to get the managing editor of Leader in 2011. So the whole concept of while still writing and doing things like this, going out and speaking to people. So the concept of leader to leader is leaders writing for other leaders. That's our leadership. It's kind of small to read this. By the way, I will, anybody gives me your email address, I'll email you the slides. I'll email you a PDF of today's presentation. So some people are thought leaders, some people are, for lack of a better term, action leaders. We have CEOs, we have nonprofit leaders, university presidents, that sort of thing. So today, though, I picked out 5 of these people who've written for us over the years, and and most of these are people who had reinventions in their own life, but the article was about one form or another, whether they were using that term about reinvention. So this is to give you some ideas about how people have say that these people who are leaders saying that you should approach things like reinventions on a personal level and professional level. So today we're talking a bit more about professional, but obviously those two categories bleed together. So Bob Buford unfortunately passed away. He was in his late 70s, passed away about a year or so ago. Has anyone ever read anything Bob or seen anything that Bob has done over the years? He's a fascinating guy. I got to know him through the Drucker world. So that was one of his books. He had 5, 6 books, Drucker and Me, forward by Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great. Jim Collins was another big Drucker guy. So Bob Buford was somebody who started out in the business world. He was in cable television and owning TV stations, and did really well. And he worked with Drucker as Drucker consultant for him. But they became very, very good personal friends. And so he wrote this book, but he wrote many other things about his time with Drucker.
I'm sorry, is that Peter Drucker, the strategist from McKinsey, that guy?
Well, yeah. Why don't I go back? I'll back up for those of you. So Peter Drucker was, thank you for the prompt on that. Peter Drucker was considered the father of modern management. He was awarded the nation's highest professional honor, or civilian honor, I should say, the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2002. This was right around the time that I did a big feature story. I wrote about him a lot for USA Today, and I interviewed him in person. So he was considered the father of modern management. He sold millions of books. There's a Drucker Institute, his name in California. There's the Drucker School, also in California, Southern California. So, and he lived to be 95. He died in 2005 at 95. So I was very privileged to have written about him for USA Today, to have interviewed him. And when I did that interview in 2002, it went so well. I interviewed him for 4 hours the night before he gave a keynote address to a group of librarians. And that emboldened me to start on the book. So I was able to interview him a number of times in person. Unfortunately, he passed away before I even had a book contract. But again, 2 books came together. So, and so Drucker, so he had several strands to his career. He had his consulting, he had teaching that he did at the Drucker School, and before that at NYU and other places. So would it be cool to have a school named after you, an MBA program? When he went out there, it wasn't named for him, but he was there for a while in Claremont and named the school for him. So the consulting, all sorts of consulting, also including a lot of nonprofit. People here have mentioned about nonprofits, tons of pro bono consulting. Consulting, teaching, writing books, writing tons of journal articles. He wrote a column for the Wall Street Journal for 20 years. He wrote for Harvard Business Review regularly. All these things that are like really, really hard to do that he did. And in his books, it sold millions of copies. So to me, he's been like, super high level, but a role model to me. So, and Leader to Leader really started through him. What was then called the Leader to Leader, actually it was the Drucker Institute at the beginning. It was started by Bob, and the main person, Francis Hesselbein, who's Francis is editor-in-chief of Leader to Leader, and managing editor. Frances, for many years, was the CEO of the Girl Scouts of the USA, and when she retired, she's another person who reinvented herself regularly. When Frances retired, she and Bob got the idea to do, this was in 1990, a leadership institute, an institute based for management and leadership of nonprofits. And they said, the only way this is going to work is with Peter's name on it. And because they were both so close to Peter and worked with him quite a bit, and also were good friends of him, he went along. But eventually, it became different names: Leader Institute, now the Francis Hesselbein Leadership Forum. So there's all these interrelated strands to this. So in Bob's article, Drucker has this device with five questions that you ask yourself. Originally, it started through the nonprofit world and it morphed beyond that. So he talks in this article, which was adapted from that Drucker and Me book. He talks in his article about using Drucker's work, but applying it to his own. So he took the 5 questions, and because he realized it would be applicable to what he wanted to do. And I should say with Bob that after he did his TV thing, and I think he was around in his late 40s, early 50s, he realized he didn't want to do that anymore. He had done what he could do in the TV business, and he wanted to get into nonprofits, but especially in the spiritual, let's put it that way, the spiritual world. So he was very involved in the early years of mega churches. So he himself was not a man of the cloth, but he was just really a super part of that world, and introduced Drucker to that world. He talks about that in the article. So he started a couple things. He started a group called the Leadership Network, which was, and as far as I know, that still exists, helping pastors to you'd say run their operations better, and also a group called Halftime, which I know still exists, which talks about people going from success to significance in the second half of life. And so he did those, but he had never written before, certainly not books. So he did a book called Halftime, which became a big bestseller, and it just came out in a fairly new edition a few years ago before he passed away. And Drucker, who never wrote forewords, very rarely wrote forewords for other people's books, wrote forewords to both Halftime and then the follow-up, which is called Stuck in Halftime. So Buford really took seriously this idea of reinvention for himself, but also helping other people to do it. So he modified the 5 questions for himself. Now again, this was in this second half of life, and use this as a guide. He was another person that I felt very privileged to know. I wrote about him, by the way, for USA Today also. I mentioned him in the books too, but he had a book called Finishing Well that I reviewed for USAT, and I wrote in 2004. So again, I will, anyone who asks me, I'll email you the slides. But again, having something, reinvention can be a very slippery concept. So that's why I feel that in the people that I'm going to talk about today, the 5 different people, that they all have these different devices for how you can think more concretely about reinvention. And these things, in terms of his customers, certainly would have changed, if you think about it, from when he was running a business of TV stations and cable. Had to have changed. And I imagine starting nonprofits is a tough road to hoe. As I said, as far as I know, both of those are still around. Bob, unfortunately, I believe he's 78 when he passed away. But again, a really fascinating person. So the whole idea of coming up with these questions, and you'll see they map very, not exactly, but very closely with what Drucker's 5 questions are. There's a whole book, by the way. It's been, I think it's its 3rd edition now that Drucker did. That it's still in print and sold quite well, about the 5 questions. That has some of Peter's content, but then they reached out to other thought leaders and asked for their content as well. And I would recommend that book. Bob's books are, as I said, there's a spiritual component to it that maybe not everybody would go for, but I still think they're really quite good books. So again, we can talk more later about Bob and how he applied these things, but again, I think this is a really nice device and shows the value of introspection. However, here's something where another leader author who, I don't know, but you say downplays, but somewhat downplays the idea of introspection, saying that yes, it's important to think about these things. But Herminia Ibarra, and she's a business school professor in INSEAD, which I believe is in France, and this was a really good book. I think she has 2 books, maybe 3. Harvard Business Review Press. I mean, she's taught at all sorts of fantastic, very high-level business schools. So her thing is that you can only think so much about these things, and then you kind of have to go out there and do something, leading to whatever it is, and it may not work, but at least you've tried it. And it can mean all sorts of things, but that if you think about these things too long, all sorts of not so great things can happen. So therefore you need to take some action. So here are some quotes from the article. Effective leaders are highly self-aware, purpose-driven, and authentic, but how do they get to be that way? And again, so most people think about, introspection, self-reflection. I don't think she's saying don't do this, but I believe she's saying you have to really go beyond that, and that her research, which she talks about more in the book, shows the opposite. That insular mindsets can be counterproductive. The past. We want to learn from the past, certainly, but we can't, rigidly anchor you in the past or anchor you rigidly in the past is not great for tons of reasons. But again, we don't want to say you can't learn anything from the past. You obviously can. You have to be self-aware, about these things. But we all know what it's like to just sort of get stuck in the past. So this concept of outsider, which I think is great, and I think it's probably difficult to do. And she talks about it, this obviously more in the article and also more in that great book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. And I guess I should also say that, these things, whether or not you're planning on going for a leadership position or whatever, these things apply in lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be saying, well, her book is called Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. I don't necessarily want to be in a leadership position, so I can't learn anything from this, and I don't think that's a good way of looking at it. And you see that she is talking about reflection, but reflection based on what you do. And so, she talks about things like reaching out to different people, going out into different networks. And again, since I don't know, for those of you who are doing 40 plus, I don't know exactly what the curriculum entails. So if I'm saying certain things that are like just totally different, you'll have to just take this for what it's worth.
Yeah, Bruce, I have a question
Sure.
of these. What would be some examples of outside? I mean, I think it sounds like maybe trying different classes or jobs, or what would you say?
That could be. One of the things would be maybe finding a different network of people because, you know, people's networks, I don't want to say they can get stale, but they got to know the same things as the same people you do. So if you go into, let's say, pick a field where there's something you could do where it wouldn't, something you're thinking of, but maybe you, it wouldn't entail taking, let's say, a job or a position in it, but if you could get into those networks in some ways, so you're meeting other people.
Different perspective.
Different perspectives, looking for different perspectives. She also talks about within an organization, because obviously we need to be thinking about things within organizations. Talks about being this concept of being not a hub, which is fine, and being a hub of information and whatever, but being a bridge, so that you're bridging the people you're working with other people that they don't necessarily know. Yes, sir.
So is her target audience managers? What is the target audience?
Of ours,
Yes.
I would say probably in her book, yes, managers, aspiring leaders, but I think it applies to anyone. I think her books sell to just all sorts of people who want to take this. But yeah, you know, Harvard Business Review Press is the publisher. So I think probably she's looking at her target audience as managers, aspiring managers, leaders. But, you know, as we know, leaders can be anybody.
So they already have established networks, and she's saying look to other networks. Is that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's probably figuring that most of her readers have various, whether they're online networks, in-person networks, or whatever. But so I think that that's kind of what she's getting at. And in this bridge concept, she's saying, you know, we need to bridge these people out to other people, maybe in the organization or elsewhere, who have different sorts of knowledge, different sorts of contact. One of the things I believe that all five of these people that I'm talking about today have is this idea, and Drucker certainly had this and wrote about this a lot, and I've mentioned in the books, is the power, for lack of a better term, the power of the outside, the power of getting beyond your four walls. So it's, let's say if you're working as a manager or whatever, that not becoming so insular that you don't realize what's kind of going on in the outside world, to your stakeholders and anything beyond that. And then for anybody, you know, kind of getting out there and doing different things, going into different groups. I mean, I like to, beyond even speaking, I like to go into groups and kind of things like this, where there's people that you can meet and network with and learn from. And so I like to do that for different sorts of things if I can. So that's, I believe, the kind of thing that she's talking about, is that, you know, broadening and seeing what, you know, hey, maybe there's some real interest there for you that you didn't know about before. And meeting people, you know, it is very often those people that you didn't know before are going to be the ones who are going to help you. Either here in 40 Plus or elsewhere, has anyone talked about this concept of weak ties, W-E-A-K, ties? Okay, Mark is attributed to Mark Granovetter, who still teaches at Stanford, but pretty sure when he did this, he was at Johns Hopkins in the early 70s. So the idea of weak ties is that he did it for job hunting, but I believe it applies for all sorts of things. That the people you know are they're going to kind of know the same opportunities that you might already know about. They're going to know the same people. But it's almost like this friend of a friend thing. Like there's another guy who has written for us named David Burkus, B-U-R-K-U-S, professor at Oral Roberts in Utah. So David Burkus has a book called Friend of a Friend of a Friend, whatever, and he talks about this as well. So the weak ties, and this has certainly happened in my life, where friends of friends, somebody introduces to you, somebody you didn't know, go out into a farther out network, and you get an opportunity because of that. So I think the weak ties thing is, and other people have written about this, but again, it goes back to this professor named Mark Reinvention. So that's the idea here, but again, thinking of this big concept of just kind of getting out there and meeting other people, doing other things. I love going to conferences, and that's a great way. Yes, sir.
Just very practically speaking, I think this is why I took the 40-plus training course. I knew how to look for a job. I knew about LinkedIn. I thought my resume was good, because I got a great experience and all that. But I just said, maybe since it's not working, I got to try something different. And so just kind of having that self-awareness to know, kind of this is the box I'm in, but I want to continue to grow and expand and reinvent myself as a learning organization, as opposed to just feel like, well, I've got all this experience and knowledge, so people need to be coming to me. It doesn't really happen like that.
No.
So if I'm not willing to go outside, because I figure when I came here, I've met all new people who I never knew before. They've gotten to know me. I've seen some of their tactics, different strategies and ways to go about things.
Right.
And I think that's critical for everyone,
Yeah.
leaving your comfort zone.
And could I, when you said that about weak ties, it sounded to me like those people who are not my first primary connections on LinkedIn, but the second or even third, the friend of friends. And there's an argument right there for, saying, hey, could we connect you? I see that you know so-and-so. And maybe they'd even be more beneficial for me to network with the people I already know and maybe.
Yeah, or a combination thereof.
Yeah.
And then, okay, if you're then become, first level or whatever with them, then maybe they see something you do that say, wow, you wrote an article about XYZ, they're interested in that. So I think, kind of getting yourself out there in that way is so important. And then, so this combination of the online as well as things like this, because the in-person thing is just is so important. And so I think that when you think about this, it's a little bit counterintuitive what she's saying that you should do in terms of being, in some ways it's maybe different terminology for something that you might kind of already do. But again, like with the idea of the conferences, and sometimes it's great if you can do it, because we all know conferences can be expensive, you may have to travel or whatever. But if there's a way you can do it, to just like go into a conference that you don't know anything about, and sort of pick up, you might have some things in common with people, and pick up some knowledge that you didn't know before. I think there's scope for that in DC, because there's things you can get in the DC area anyway. There's things that you can probably get into on passes or whatever that maybe people living in small towns couldn't do, but they can because they live here in DC.
Volunteering at conferences gets you great inroads. If you go and volunteer to work the conference.
Volunteering, which is, thank you, because that's a great part of something like this. Volunteering for organizations to kind of try, I think she's saying, kind of try things out. Yes, sir.
Just to take this one further step, and talk about weak connections,
Right.
and looking for new, different perspectives to the previous slide that I very phrase up there. So we're locked in the rigidity in the past, so anchor you rigidly in the past. So along these lines of conferences or volunteering, or let's say maybe even any kind of a club or activity like that, would it be a good idea to pick one with some purpose, not just randomly?
Right.
Pick one that is really going to put you in a zero connection position. Where you know nobody. You're not going through a connection of any kind.
Right.
but something completely new for you. Is that?
I think it's a very interesting
Is that
concept.
fitting into this, or is that?
Yeah, you could build a whole career around that. You're right about that.
It does.
Yeah. I think it could be a great idea. I think you said the
People do that when they move. If you relocate to another part of the
Right.
country, right? That's not that unusual.
Right.
But for somebody who hasn't relocated, I think that's a bit unusual. But maybe that's within the scope.
It could
of
be,
what-
you know, it's something that maybe there's an interest there, but you don't have anything. So, like say, in volunteering. I was going to say professional associations, but that would be different because there would be some, unless you did a totally different other part of the professional association. And as you know, in professional associations, great ways to get experience. You know, you put on conferences. I've talked to people who have told me that they got experience putting on conference because they volunteered to put on a conference, you know, to be the conference manager, and it worked out really well. So, yeah, I think that's a great thing, and I think all of you should maybe think about that, this zero connection thing, about what might be totally new, and really, you know, as you mentioned about thinking outside the box, you have to get outside the box in order to do that. So, thinking about what would be kind of strategic, that's not totally like something you don't like, but something that's would be kind of in your area of interest, and then how you would find out about that, what the opportunities are, maybe things that schools and alumni networks could, but if I were you, I would really seriously think about that idea and about how you could apply it, maybe help other people. Apply it. So, yes, sir.
I moved back to the U.S. a couple years ago after 15 years abroad, and I had my own business for 10 years in Africa, but I realized, well, my business had been more successful, I still have it. So, as the gentleman here was saying, your job search is a sales job. I came back to the U.S. and went and got my insurance license because I knew I'd get free sales training. And it's been huge in terms of giving me a whole nother skill set, and it's zero connections and starting to learn all about something I didn't know, but it also taught me about retirement plans and how the financial industry is consolidated and all sorts of other things that are very useful. So yeah, I'd say there are many ways, because sales training is so expensive, I just knew insurance companies give it up for free.
Well, it's a very interesting idea. Yeah. So I mean, again, another great thing about you put something here, we would not find out about these ideas without being in this room today and hearing things as they come up from people. Because I think there's all sorts of ways to, you know, to sort of operationalize these ideas. And again, it's easy to say leaving your comfort zone. It's super easy to say that. But it's, as we all know, it's difficult to do that for tons of different reasons. Whitney Johnson, anyone familiar with Whitney? She's a really interesting person who's written for us she's written 2 articles for us. This is a book that came out, it's not her most recent book, but it came out in 2015. This is where she did her article, Disrupt Yourself. So she talks about self-disruption. Somewhat in her other books and in her other articles. She also does a lot of speaking, podcasting, and she talks about disruption for organizations, for companies as well. And so Whitney Johnson's another person who really reinvented herself, and she's written about this a little bit in this article, but also in her books. Just very briefly, she was a music major in college, but she kind of said like this was more like sort of her parents' dream than her own dream, and it wasn't like she was super passionate about music. She got this was like maybe, I don't know, 30 or so years ago, let's say, give or take. Her husband was going for his PhD, so she took like a really entry-level Wall Street job. But eventually decided that she wanted more than an entry-level job. She took, you talk about taking classes, she took finance and accounting classes at night while doing her job, her low-level job during the day, and eventually kind of got into being a broker, being an analyst, and then went from there to, some of you may have heard of Clayton Christensen, this idea of disruptive innovation. He's really popular kind of within this world. He wrote for us before my time, professor at Harvard Business School. So she ended up starting this fund, investment fund, Disruptive Innovation Fund, and then now does maybe still does some investing, but is now a speaker, coach, a whole bit, and writing this book. So she certainly lived this whole idea of reinvention. And so this article, she talks about constraints, and most of us think, oh, when we hear about constraints, we don't like that. It seems very limiting. But she's saying that constraints can be a good thing. And she also talks, and this is in the book and in the article, I didn't reproduce it here, but a big thing she's used in her career was this concept of the S-curve that she attributes to a man named Everett Rogers, who was a professor, a sociology professor in the 50s and 60s, and he wrote a classic book called The Diffusion of Innovations. And so in there, he had an S-curve of how do innovations get adopted, the ones that do. And they start small, they build up with experience, and with knowledge, and with sales, let's say, and then they kind of reach the top. But then when they reach the top, that's where the problems can come in, because it's very hard to sustain that or make it go up. So what do you do? And very often you need to do something else. So she's saying that that people need to disrupt themselves also, even if they think things are going really well. They need to, and that doesn't necessarily mean leaving your job. It could mean, if you're in a job, it could mean doing it in a different way, or staying with the same company but looking for something else. Or it can mean all sorts of things. But it means that you can't just stay in that comfort zone, even if things are going really well. Even if you perceive things going really well. She talked about it not in the article, but in one of her books. She talked about this idea when she was doing being a stock analyst, where the companies merged. Two big brokerages merged, and there was somebody already really established at this other firm covering the stocks she was covering. And so even though she was doing really well with the other firm, she moved into another area that was less well known and ended up doing really well. So again, everybody here, I'm sure, knows the drill. You can be doing really, really well in your work, and something happens from the outside that has nothing to do with you, but it certainly has an impact on you. So whether or not that's necessarily the constraint, but just saying that there are constraints, and they force you to be more innovative and more entrepreneurial.
Chris, is there a way to relate that to if you're trying to disrupt yourself or reinvent yourself, and the constraints would that be like the outside boundaries of your skill set, or what you can do, or what would be an example of these constraints that we should know?
The constraints.
I have an idea. If you want some.
Yes.
Because as you were saying this, I was curious about what's everybody's main constraint in this room. A constraint in my mind is what's keeping you from the job that you deserve.
So a self-constraint, you mean? What
Yeah,
is-
a constraint in job search is what's that number one thing that you're likely avoiding that you don't necessarily know about and can't articulate because it's probably uncomfortable. What's that number one thing that's constraining you? Whether it's articulating yourself and your value in a conversation, or having the motivation to get up and do the networking every day, or whatever. What's that number one constraint in your job search that's holding you back?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, I think related to that too, another constraint might be saying, okay, well, you're looking for things, and maybe you're saying a constraint might be, in a perfect world, you would get XYZ degree. You go for an MBA or whatever, but it's not because for a variety of reasons. And that might be seen as a constraint but it could also be seen as an opportunity to think, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to do an MBA. What are the alternatives? There are tons of alternatives, presumably, to doing an MBA. Or you might say, I'd love to, I'd love to go to France and study with Herminia Ibarra at INSEAD. Well, that's probably going to be a problem for most people. But if you say, well, there's lots of other alternatives to doing that. Maybe I can't study with her, but there's online, there's other schools, and all sorts of things. So accepting maybe that that's a constraint, but it'll make you think more creatively, because probably some people get so stuck on saying, I really want to, or I can't advance unless I get this MBA, or whatever the degree might be. And it becomes a limiting factor. Whereas if you can kind of move beyond that constraint. And there's also something in the article where she said that if you just have too many resources, let's say you're at a company where they're just throwing money at a particular division, that could be not good as well. It can inhibit creativity. You can start working on things that just really are not all that great. The money might dry up. So, but I think it's a creative way of looking at it. And again, if you just go online, even beyond our articles and her books, I mean, you could find things where she's talking about how she's intentionally moved her own career, but it wasn't like she always thought that this was, she didn't go in thinking she was going to work in finance. She kind of had to take that job. But then she realized that became a springboard.
Could that constraint word become a synonym for limiting beliefs?
I'm sorry for
limiting beliefs.
It could be, because I think you have to think about, is the constraint coming from within or from without? In a lot of cases, I think it's coming from without. Let's say where companies are not getting very good resources, or the constraint is that your organization isn't doing well or whatever. But I think a lot of things in terms of constraints could be, yes, the limiting factors we put on ourselves, or let's say in a whole professional group might think of, that they're under constraints. It could be a professional group that feels put upon, feels under siege, feels whatever. And then you really have to think about, do you want to stay in that professional group? And I mean a whole profession. There are professions out there that are like that are kind of under siege.
When she talks about constraints, something being useful, and I'm trying to think of examples of that, and deadlines, I think, to me, are a constraint that actually helps. It's like, okay, I have this goal, and even if it's artificial, I'm going to finish this by a certain date. That helps get it done. So that's, to me, that's one of the good, one of the good constraints.
I agree with the deadline, and so the deadline is, let's say in the newspaper sense, it's set by others, and we may not like it, but we do it, and a lot of times we'll think of very creative ways to meet that deadline. So it's kind of a goal, yes, but certainly in the case of newspapers, it's like it has to be done. I mean, you've got to meet that deadline.
Mortgage.
So, pardon me?
Mortgage.
Well, there you go.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
What are some
What's
things
the
that
good
will,
part of ignoring this constraint?
yeah, that concentrate the mind.
Yes.
Right,
So are you-
concentrate the mind. Yes.
So are you sacrificing quality of your karate to do that?
Well, obviously you don't want to do that, but what it could mean is the whole idea that perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
If you would maybe think, let's say, going back to this journalism thing, well, I really want to get, let's say, 3 different quotes for this very short story. That really might be nice, but really one would be great. And if you spend all your time looking for those 3 quotes, it might be really difficult. So I don't think, so are you sacrificing quality? Probably not. But I think those are internal things that people have to think about, what those balances are. Because, yeah, we don't want to do a bad job. But these things, they can help these deadlines, or setting a deadline, if you are looking into, let's say, school, setting some sort of deadline for yourself. So this isn't going on forever in terms of if you wanted to go ahead and look for another degree, let's say. So as we see, there's lots of different strands to this. And again, I'm not really a big fan of change. I don't think most people are really, but as she's saying, this is it. Change is the natural mode of human life. And things that keep the experience going. There's really something to be said for that. And the profession, I was talking about profession, so professional organizations, again, so important for giving you opportunities. If you want to stay within that profession, giving you I would say most professional organizations are looking for people who want to do things, especially who are willing to take responsibility. So thinking of ways that you can, yes, reinvent yourself, but maybe do it within a structure, that's already there. And so, again, she's talking about both things, both personal, but also organizational disruptions. And I would encourage you to read at least some of Clayton Christensen. Has anybody read any of his books? Okay, yeah. Very interesting guy. He also did a book, this maybe even his best-selling book. I think Innovator's Dilemma, I think it was the real big bestseller. But he also did a book called something like How Will I Measure My Life? A shorter book that's like really, really interesting. He gets into all sorts of strands that have nothing to do with work. So again, you see that last part about where she's talking about it in an organizational sense. So again, with all these things, like being intentional, being creative, but really that outside world, that whole outside world aspect, so that you're not, like, one of the things, Tucker talked about that a lot, to go back to him for a moment, that he would advise people to, learn about your community, learn about what goes beyond that, learn, don't just stay inside. Some of it was just like really tactical stuff, like he would talk to really like high-level managers and say, go out on sales calls, learn about, because he was saying it's important to learn about your customers, but it's also important to learn about your non-customers. Well, there's many more non-customers. So how do you move some of those non-customers into customers? And then just, again, this idea that I don't think maybe some of us, or a lot of us know intellectually, control is an illusion. We know it, but we don't like it. I don't like it, because we like to feel like we're in control, and in some ways we are, certainly. If you weren't in control of some processes, you wouldn't do any of these things. You can't just leave things up to fate. Disruption fosters innovation. And let's face it, there's a premium these days on innovation. We want people, it has to be more than a buzzword. It really does. And organizations want people who can be innovative, but in ways that help, that help the organization. And so, again, not just buzzword, but that innovate, if you can really make innovation happen. Because lots of things that are out there, people that can do really well, but like other people can do those things well. So how can you differentiate? So, Bruce, would you
relate that, because we've seen so much disruption in our industry, in newspapers, news outlets. There's a lot of innovation, but newspaper outlets are still in trouble. For people like you and I that are, reinventing.
right.
Is it a matter of just reacting? You have to just react to what's going on in the environment, or?
For individual people as opposed to the organizations themselves, you mean?
Well, yeah, I think because we're all,
Right.
looking for individual help.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I think that to use that as an example, so there's a thing where within journalism, people have a variety of skills. They really do. And so I think those skills can be expressed in different ways. And I think the difficulty for a lot of people, from what I can tell, because I stayed in touch with a lot of my former colleagues at the paper, some of whom are still there, but obviously most of them are not. How can those skills be used in different ways? Because you've got the skills of writing, which let's face it, not everybody can write well. They just can't. And even though, yes, lots of people can write well, it can be done in just so many different ways. So what are some other expressions of that? The difficulty, I think, would be going from, let's say, newspapers to other newspapers. It can happen, certainly, but I think it happens much less, because the papers themselves are certainly trying to reinvent themselves and have robust online and video and all those other things, and we see what's happening with newspaper. And I will also say, I mean, I still really like USA Today. I buy it occasionally. I look at it online. Sometimes I tweet out their things. So I have nothing against USA Today. They had bigger fish to fry than me, 10 years ago. But certainly that company has gone through a lot of changes in those 10 years, and all of them have, and all the news. So it's very tough for any of the media companies. But I think on an individual level of how can these skills be used? Also, this thing of if somebody's, let's say, in media now, just thinking about, hey, this probably is not going to last forever. And so what are some other things that I can do, other goals like I had with writing books, and also with teaching, this parallel career idea. So I started teaching in '96. So I was still at the paper for 12 more years. Since after that, I've been doing it since '96 at Catholic University. I love doing that. So I'm still involved in the library world in that way, even though it's been years since I've been a day-to-day librarian. But I use all sorts of skills doing that, and I use all sorts of skills from when I was at the paper, certainly in my work now, leader to leader, but also in the teaching. So it's like, what are if somebody say in media now, what are some of the things they could be doing right now with volunteering, teaching, starting by...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you started teaching, were you thinking of it as I should have some other tools in my toolbox, and this media thing doesn't last forever?
Yes, I mean, that was certainly one reason, and also because I just thought that teaching would be an interesting thing for me to do, even though I pretty much knew it was not going to be I didn't really want to do this full-time thing. But and again, this is something that back in my days working in music, I never would have thought I would teach, ever. I'm sure I had not one thought about that in those years, but it's the way things evolved over the years. And so in terms of getting started, though, the way that I did that is I wasn't even really sure that I'd want to be even an adjunct. But somebody at the paper who was, I guess, I think she might have been in HR, I'm not sure. But I went to talk to her about some of these things. So what are my possibilities in the outside world, but I want to stay in my job. Something to be complementary. And somehow this thing came up about teaching. And she said, do you have anybody over there who's like a mentor to you? And I said, yes, I did. She said, well, call that person and just ask, what are your possibilities right now? And so I did. And this person said, well, you can do, I remember when this was, and she said, in 2 months from now, on XYZ date, you could do a guest lecture in my class on how USA Today Library serves reporters and editors. And I did. I prepared for it. I was super prepared for it. And I did this guest lecture, and it went really well. And one thing led to another, and this adjunct opening came up just a couple of months later. And I just kind of ran with it. So had I not done that guest lecture, so this idea of maybe some sort of volunteer teaching, but certainly guest lecturing, you know, if you're interested in it, asking somebody that you know who's at a school, I have this topic, can I do that? So that I think would be one. Is that?
Yeah, that's interesting, getting a foot in the door.
Yeah, a foot in the door, yeah, is a good way to think about it. But again, going back, so I had this just, you know, when I was at Catholic, so it was a good way to do it. But again, I reached out to somebody within the paper who was able to give me that advice that you know, I was not able to give to myself. So we'll kind of run through the other two relatively quickly, so we can have some more time for some Q&A. People familiar with Daniel Goleman? Emotional Intelligence, a huge selling book. So now, Daniel Goleman, he also kind of did a reinvention because he was he was trained as a psychologist, but then he was a reporter for the New York Times, covering things like psychology because he had that. And I think he'd done a couple of smaller books, like on meditation and some other things. I don't really believe he was looking to become a huge author. But what happened was this concept of emotional intelligence came up. He did not start this. A lot of people think that he started emotional intelligence, but he did not. Two people who were at Yale at the time wrote a journal article. And I don't think even they had big ideas on what this could be done. But they wrote a journal article. He thought it was really interesting. He built it out into a book for the, you know, popular lay audience, informed lay audience, and it became a huge selling book. And then, you know, he's written a number of other books, including this one where we adapted an article from that book. So he's known for that concept, so he kind of morphed into this big, you know, best-selling author, consultant. So converging the idea of focus, but also on the future. And he spends a lot of time in the article talking about making decisions for the long term, that it's not popular to make decisions for the long term because we tend to be obviously rewarded for the short term. We see results in the short term. We don't see them as often in the long term. But that, especially with leaders, that leaders who can think in long time frames and execute these things for long time frames, where, as he said, this is really tough. You might not be alive, you know, to see the fruits of your labors, and that's, I think, tough for a lot of us to deal with. And it's true, you know, we tend to favor the now. But if we can think of, and he's saying the far future, but I think maybe for our purposes we can think of it, you know, let's bring it in a little bit, but think about decisions that will go beyond necessarily the short term, you know, into the long term. And again, if you look at this, you know, live on long after their originators have gone. And again, goals, but I think it's certainly applicable to what we're saying today. This idea of stakeholders, without getting into a whole big thing about it, but you know, there's a big thing about 2-3 weeks ago where this group called the Business Roundtable came out. It got a lot of coverage in the press. I was quoted, John Baldoni quoted me in his Forbes.com article about it in relation to Drucker, Business Roundtable, saying, these are like super big CEOs, this was their group, saying that organizations can't just be run for the benefit of shareholders. You know, it's kind of a nuanced statement, but you have to think of other people. You think of your customers, of various stakeholders, suppliers, all sorts of things. And he's kind of getting into to that in this article. That just making decisions on just what's good for you or just what's good for your organization is not really a good way to go. Quotes a Columbia University professor. but having this, future focus is so important. And again, this is, pretty prescient because again, this was 2014, and this business roundtable statement was just a couple of weeks ago. And again, a very controversial statement because a lot of people think that businesses should be run for the thinking of your shareholders, just if you have stock, in companies, that they are the primary things, and then everything else will fall into place. Yes,
I'm sorry to hold you up, but when I'm thinking of that in terms of my own, job transition, really explain it easily. The short term is, well, I need a paycheck, but the future looking is, well, what do I really want to do? It seems like there's some tension between those. And it's kind of a luxury, as the slide says, to have that future view. But maybe there's a way to do both, get a paycheck, but still keep an eye on something more long term.
I think there is, and I think that, it's kind of what he's getting at about having some sort of balance to it, because, Drucker had a quote that, talking about managers, there will be no next 100 years if you can't take care of the next 100 days.
Sure.
So there's got to be a future, like in an organization, there's got to be a future to have. I have, because I did the book on Drucker and future, I have all sorts of Drucker kind of future-related quotes. A lot of his quotes attributed to him he did not say, which is a whole other matter. But yes, having that balance. So it could be saying, well, I'm going to portion a certain amount of time either to learning, either to go, I'm going to go to a one-day conference, let's just say. And yes, it's going to mean taking time away from whether it's a job search or something else. But that one-day conference could really pay lots of benefits later on for people I meet, and people that not only people I meet, but what I learn within that conference. So I think that would certainly be one way of thinking of it. But thinking, for a lot of people, I think they're just not even thinking long term. So you're ahead of the game if you're even thinking in that way. You're thinking with a future focus, and that you're thinking of what are the long-term implications of what we're doing. And for some people, it's having that. If you're so focused on the short term and what you're doing now, or you're focused on getting certain work done, but that work maybe isn't really all that crucial. And so how do you identify that? Saying, maybe it would be more crucial, to reach out to the networks in some way, or to find new networks, or to go to that one-day conference, or to look for a meetup or something like that in a field that might be related to to what I can do. So yes, that balance between the two. And I wanted to just sort of finish before we do a little bit more in Q&A. So this woman named Mo Yi Lam. I haven't checked to see what she's doing now, if there's been any change since this came out in 2015. So she works in the financial, I'm saying she still does, she probably still does, works in the financial world in Hong Kong. And apparently it's a fairly high-level job in this financial company. But the article's about, she's saying, hey, I had this, I had and still have this really fulfilling job, but she also realized, she'd become sort of a couch potato, and she just felt like she should be doing other things along with her work. So she just did slowly working on exercise. And where she said, well, gee, I'm sort of enjoying this. And she would add things to it. And then, let's face it, she's an ambitious person. How could she not be being in this field? And she thought, well, I'm really enjoying this, so I'm going to do an ultra marathon, again, building to it. But one of these things where you have to raise money along the way. She also talked about working for Habitat for Humanity. She went to another country, built homes. So she kind of got the bug on all these things. And then she came up with these really very high fundraising goals, which she says she met for, I mean, really, really lots of money that she did through her running. So to her, it showed her what could be possible, but it also showed her that she could do these things on her own, kind of in steps, and that she discovered, and maybe this is a little bit like Herminia Bauer now that I think of it, she only discovered it because she started doing it. She didn't think way back when, oh, I'm going to run, ultramarathon, or raise hundreds, whatever it was, with these different organizations, and she talks about the organizations in the article. She did that by doing it. She, maybe she could have started doing the marathons and it wouldn't have worked out, but it did work out. So she saw what was possible. She saw what she could do, and she saw that there was that, there was that sense of fulfillment. And again, she's saying, you can surprise yourself. Fulfillment does not have to be totally linear. I think that's another real idea that's important, that a lot of us think in very linear ways. This will lead to this, to that. And, we discovered that life isn't exactly like that. It's not exactly linear. So I was really glad that she did that. There could be false starts, all sorts of things. So all these different people in different ways, reintroducing yourself to yourself, kind of funny, but this whole idea of experimentation, which I think is the theme with some of these other articles as well.
And do you have to challenge your self-image when you were taking on other things? And
I did.
What was that like?
Well, I had to see myself being in less of a support role. As much as I'm fine with that, I really am. I like that in a lot of ways, because I found that very fulfilling. But, I had identified at a certain point that I wanted to write and do books, and I knew that part of that would be, getting out there and speaking in front of groups, which was not part of my self-image, certainly when I was in library school. But kind of eventually and some of that was Drucker related as well, in terms of like role model sort of things. But I had to go from that self-image of, well, I was in support to people in USA Today, to where I was going to be, my byline, besides my byline in the paper, my byline on books, and that I was going to go do things like this. And it's because I wanted to do that. And certainly in teaching as well, much different from a support role as I had at the paper, to when the class is your responsibility. So I think some of that came, when I did that guest lecture, that kind of emboldened me a bit, that I could then actually teach a course, bless you, and then, as I said, doing the articles kind of emboldened me that I really could do those books, because it's one thing to think that maybe, I like to do it, I could do it, but having those articles and having those things do well, and especially having Drucker as a subject of wanting to do those books, that once that USAT profile was done, and that it went really well, and that I felt like at least a certain amount of chemistry with this guy, then that emboldened me to do the books. But I think it was because I did those things. So,
So it sounds like this reinvention is not something all at once. It's not like just sitting down with yourself with a sheet of your values, but trying different things, and one thing leads to another.
Yeah, it did. Because I don't think reinvention is like a flip of the switch sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think it's and reinvention could be a term for lots of different things. I mean, it could be where let's say you don't necessarily have to become an entrepreneur or whatever. You could be, let's say, working. Let's say you take a position in a similar same industry, but maybe you approach it a different way. You become known for different things, or write about. Let's say in the case of writing, writing like you use the writing skills to write about different things, and therefore you reinvented yourself. So I think for people, sometimes it's this ongoing thing. And I think there's actually one more slide. A couple of people mentioned the impact when you did your self-introductions. So there you go. Think of the impact of achieving the goal. And now it's, like kind of breaking it down. You're thinking of, kind of what your goals are. And so the last part is that in a work situation, interim recognition and many rewards, but I think these first three things especially, and then the article she kind of fleshes it out. But she's pretty determined. You read this article, determined, but I believe that she's determined because things along the way, she saw the things that were working, and she built upon that. So I believe we still have some time for questions and any other questions. I'm going to give. Sorry, I feel like I have to in the back. I have to give you. I just feel like
It works.
It would be wrong to not give the first two.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate
Okay.
that.
So do I have another? And again, these are somewhat older things, but they're perfectly representative of the type of things that we do. So another question from somebody. I can give it to one of the other frequent questioners. Fred, maybe I should just give this to you.
Oh, no, I have to observe, recuse myself.
Yeah, you recuse yourself. Okay. Okay.
I'll
I
ask
have
you
a question, but I don't want to
Okay. I think we get. So
Just to make it more complicated, I'm not going to take this magazine because I'm going to ask a question to the group, and whoever answers, then we can get it.
Okay, that's
Because
good.
I'm very curious about what, just as a fellow job coach enthusiast, what brings you all here? What are you looking to accomplish by coming to a session like this? Is everybody here looking for work, or looking for a new career, or looking for a new business idea? If it's a career, raise your hand.
Well, sort of.
If it's a job, a new job, raise your hand. If it's something else, raise your hand. What's that something else?
Community.
Oh, connect with folks. So there's a mix of reasons why people are here.
Yeah, partly, for me, it's that discovery, like trying different things and meeting people outside my network. And Bruce articulated that in a way I hadn't heard before. But that's I think, really useful. And part of that was, I think, keeping an open mind with myself. When previously I would think, oh, this doesn't really relate to me. And then now I'm more like, maybe give it a chance.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think sometimes isn't it the terminology that we apply to things. And I'm glad that for most people, at least 5 people are kind of new to most people. They're going to give you an idea of how they approach things. And also for leader to leader, as I said, I will send you all, anybody who emails me, I'll send you a link. Usually we put up one issue usually for free. And also I'll send you the link for, I do just a very brief online newsletter once a month about leader to leader. But leader to leader, it's a subscription password protected publication. So for most other things, including these articles, you can find it online, but unless your institution, there are individual subscriptions, but most people that would be able to get it and actually read the full text would be because their institution, usually like a business or a college, let's say, that they would have access through through John Wiley, the publisher, for it. So you wouldn't necessarily find these things, but again, I'll send you, and you may want to subscribe individually. But I think all these people too, especially the real well-known ones like Daniel Goleman in particular, and Whitney Johnson and Herminia Bob, and I guess Bob too. There's Mo Yi Lam is the least known of those 5. But you're going to find a lot of information about those folks online and kind of what they've done, and maybe other things too that they've written that, or that you see on YouTube or whatever, that you feel are really applicable to what you've done. So these are the 2 books. The book, Creating the Future the Pre-Directed Way, was the more recent one, 2013. Developing and applying forward-focused mindset. And again, for both these books, what I felt that I did is something that Drucker himself did not do. He did not organize it. There's tons of things, as I mentioned, tons of things about Drucker in the future that are out there. But he never organized it into one way. He didn't sit down here, I have 10 elements of the future. He didn't sit down and say, these are the 10 elements of the future. Just through my research, my study, my interviews with him, that I came up with those things. And in Living More Than One World, the first book, it's the idea of organizing and Drucker's work on the individual more so than the organization. And Francis, whom I mentioned, who started what's now the Francis S. Spown Leadership Forum and managing editor of Leader to Leader, Francis wrote forward to my first book. So I felt that I did kind of unique things in both of those books. So there's my contact information. Right now, normally I would put up my website. Right now, I'm in this situation where my website is just my name, BruceRosenstein.com. It might actually come up, but I'm in this sort of unfortunate situation where my website needs complete, total overhaul, and it's getting it. And so the company that's doing it said, well, if it comes up, it's kind of only temporary, because it's going to have a total new look and feel. But there I am on LinkedIn. Please, connect with me on LinkedIn. I do a lot on Twitter. But I also, even though my site isn't up, and this has been kind of instructive to me too. It's been a while since this site, it's been since the summer, since the site has been basically down. And I found that the world is still turned. It's like the world is not stopped because my site is down. Even though at the beginning I thought it was a total tragedy. And I don't want this to happen forever, and pretty soon it'll be back up in its new and improved form. But there's a lot of stuff out there. So if I've needed to send people to things about my work, I've been able to do that by sending them to other links and other places I've written for. It's just not one handy thing within my site, although there's actually a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. So again, please send me an email, certainly to stay in touch, but also I'll send you the link for the free issue and also for our newsletter. Yes, sir.
Bruce, you walked us through a body of literature, and each of these works are not just mere information, but they're really invitations to transform ourselves. It feels to me a little overwhelming with so many options. Do you have recommendations as to how to go through it? Do you invite people to read more than one book at the same time?
For the body of literature about these things? Yeah. Well, depending on what certainly some of these books, like Whitney's book, Disrupt Yourself, is really good. Many of ours. The Buford book is, I would say, for some of these things, maybe check some of them out online, like on Google Books first, or a library before you, because Halftime, Bob's book about reinvention, the second part of life, could be really good for you, or you could say, well, maybe it's not quite being marked for me. Or the book about Drucker might be too Drucker focused for you. There are probably other things, though, that just sort of, right now I'm not thinking of, that are other books in the field. Remember, I kept this to just leader authors, but there are other books that really kind of deal with reinvention in some way. So if you email me and I really think about it, I can send you some other things, because you're right, there is a big body of literature about this.
I jotted down the How Will I Measure My Life
Yeah.
title. That strikes a chord with me.
Right,
Often
Clayton
when I'm
Christensen.
looking at, often if you go on Amazon, you can get a sample, like
Right.
a chapter, and if it sparks, you know it. If it doesn't, you
Right.
move on.
And then there, the recommendation engine and Amazon. Some of these will turn up in Google Books as well. But I'd be happy to think about this a little bit more about, because I probably have some lists at home about books that are kind of reinvention and self-transformation oriented. That would be good for you to read, because I think a lot of times you do need those things where having something concrete in a whole book, as opposed to an article or looking at somebody's presentation or listening to a podcast. I do hope that the slides today will give you like some ideas, because go back and kind of look at some of the information in there. And we've had other authors who've written similarly on it, but I chose these 5, and one special reason is that most of them have done this personal/professional transformation as well. I did also, to kind of get back within combining these different worlds and this bridge concept. So I did a similar sort of thing for within the library world back in May. So on professional reinvention, what we did was I was the moderator, and I had 4 people within the library world who have done professional reinventions. So I did it as the moderator, but kind of putting together the panel, and so the folks in the audience, because the library world is another world that's like hugely ripe for reinventions, both personal and organizational. And so hearing people's stories, that, hey, this is possible. This person, these 4 people they reinvented themselves within the field, but they reinvented themselves. So getting people to hear that. So I think examples are always a good thing. Meeting other people who've done it. But yeah, certainly reading. I think reading is super important. So please.
I know to me it's inspiring to hear from people who have, in fact, gone through it. And it seems like everyone's, there's generalization, but everybody's journey is a little bit different. And everybody has different insights. So I think it's time to conclude the official part of the presentation. Maybe people have one-on-one questions, but I wanted to say thank you for being our speaker and present you with this gift. It's a large coffee cup.
I like that. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much.